Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host, Dan Maisie, dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. We're excited to welcome Gary Laybourne to the pod today. Gary is a dedicated advocate for youth development through sports and has devoted his career to empowering young people to overcome barriers through sports and physical activity. From his early days as a coach to leading the innovative charity Coach Call, Gary has shown an unwavering commitment to unlocking the potential in young individuals, especially those facing challenges. As CEO of Coach Call, Gary has transformed the landscape of sports apprenticeships in the UK, creating nearly 600 apprenticeships and impacting thousands of participants in communities most in need. His work emphasises personal development, mentoring, and professional education with a strong focus on achieving lasting outcomes for both apprentices and their communities. Gary's passion for sport extends beyond his professional achievements. He remains an active competitor and volunteer coach, emphasising the importance of participation and community outreach. His insights into creating impactful programs, fostering engagement, and navigating the challenges of the sports industry will undoubtedly inspire and inform our listeners. Gary, welcome to Talent Talks.
That's some intro, Dan. Thank you very much. That makes me sound way more important than I am. But yeah, thank you, mate.
Oh, not a problem. I'm quite happy to make those kind of intros. Don't worry. Let's get straight into it. This is the starter question we ask every single one of our guests. What is your experiences of hiring, of being hired, and what are your lessons learned?
Largely, I would say recruitment, either in personal experience or those that I've found being the person on the other side of the desk that's doing the recruiting, it's just not fun. Like, that's such a fluffy thing to say, but it really isn't. Like, there's so much stress. It's such a rigid process. It doesn't get to the person at the heart of it. And you don't actually uncover some of those real skills that they have. So for me, as being someone who felt, in previous roles where I've walked away thinking I didn't get to sell myself at all there. I didn't really get the opportunity to say or show what I could do. And in the same way, if I, as always, trying to be open and honest, if I reflect back on certainly some of the earlier interview processes that I've ever led, I look back on it and think, well, I didn't take that learning and make that when I had the opportunity to then interview others. So why was I not giving them that same platform to show what it was? And I think that's probably the biggest bugbear for me is that we have a role, whatever that role is, from the most junior entry level of roles through to the most senior, we have a role, and yet we seem to apply the same recruitment strategies and processes regardless of what it is. And it's absolutely bonkers. Like, if there's nothing else over the last few years, I've become very conscious of it, but I'd love to think I'm much more proactive to making sure that we don't do that, and that every single recruitment process we go through looks very different from the last one, or certainly very different to the role we've got on offer.
That's really interesting, I think, because you're right. The only real difference between going in as a junior account exec or whatever it might be through to senior leadership is essentially probably a presentation, in the sense that you're going to have to put something together when you're a much more senior leader in terms of where you want to take things and the future vision. But actually the process in terms of CV, interview, etc., are pretty much the same throughout. You mentioned around the fun aspect, and I don't think it's bully at all. I think it's a really interesting point. What do you do now, or what have you kind of implemented over the years to make sure that there is a bit more of an element of fun that makes it just more enjoyable for both you and the team, but also for the candidates that you're employing?
Yeah, I mean, if I think of like the Coach Call apprentices, for example, that we work with, right? So for those that aren't aware, we're targeting underrepresented groups, young people that potentially have had some serious challenge or barriers to overcome in their lives, right? So invariably, if we're then saying to them through the marketing, it doesn't matter about those barriers, come down. And then I sit and I interview Dan, the prospective apprentice, across a desk for a sports community coach role, knowing your background. Like, what am I doing? Like, you are not going to have a CV to chat through. And even if you do have a CV, you're certainly probably not going to have the confidence to talk to it. So let's get to the fundamental thing that we're hiring here. Again, strip away the old way of working. What are we looking for? We're looking for confident young people that really want to turn the page. And we're looking for people that can just show a passion for sport. They don't have to be a polished coach. They don't have to have any of that. We're going to help them with that. So let's set up some games and disarm them from the minute they walk through the door, right? They come in, we make some introductions and we say, right, we're getting stuck straight into a game. And they think, oh God, this is more like a fun sports session or something. But what they don't realize is that what we're cleverly doing is dropping in little leadership things. So like, right, pile of bibs over there, guys, 2 teams. Let's see. Now, who's the first person that's going to walk over and pick up those bibs? We've not asked anyone to go do it. So who's going to go do that? So just some of those little things that actually draws out what are the key skills that you want to achieve from that role. So, and again, I challenge any employer at any role to start to think about, strip away all your JD, all the things that you're asking for, and think about the 3 things. What's that perfect 3 things that that person needs to have to succeed in this role? They could be professional or personal type things. And critically, how are they going to fit with your team? So what are the things that are going to make them a success in that role? So really give some due care to that, and then think, is an interview in its normal format the best way to bring that to life? Because most of all, you're probably going to have that on their CV anyway. So either you're accusing them of lying or you want to understand a bit more about what they do, fine. But actually try to think of some fun games or certainly some very different questions that you can do. And there's plenty of resources in this wonderful digital tech age that we have. There's plenty of things that you can do, some leadership stuff online. It doesn't have to be in person, where you can get people displaying those skills and displaying those traits through much better ways than just, I ask a question, you answer it. Simple as that.
It's really interesting. I think the CV is best described as a necessary evil at the moment, and I think it's something that needs to innovate. And you're right, there are tools out there, tech tools out there that are looking at doing just that. You mentioned it just there around the kind of top 3 things that an employer will need. Do you have a view on the emphasis between skill versus value and culture there, or is it a bit of a mix, or are you much more right? Actually, we focus on the values and we focus on, and that's it, because everything else can ultimately be taught.
Yeah, I think again it's the scale of things, and I think at Coach Core, again, just to underline, we don't employ the young apprentices ourselves. We're working
Yeah,
with groups of employers to do that. And the reason that I underline that point is that we can advise and we can support on this, but it obviously has to be right for every single organization. And exactly to your point, Dan, some of them are looking for slightly more, albeit rough gem, but slightly more skills advanced stuff. So they might have very specific roles that have safeguarding concerns, or it needs a particular thing. Gymnastics is a prime example. You can't just have someone straight away coaching how to somersault and things like that. But at the same time, most of it is us checking and challenging. And then exactly, to my point a second ago, making sure that actually it's about a values and a culture thing. Because if you get just good people, the right people, you can train the skills bit, usually, is what we find within this space. And again, being that very open, honest person, if I'm honest enough to say, we didn't do that when we started to recruit. So we would tell employers to do that, but we just assume that that's what you have to do with younger people. Well, then, as the role started to grow, as Coach Core grew, it was like, well, hang on, arguably we're not doing the same. We're going out and we're interviewing and we're starting to employ traditional methods and things like that. And actually, what's really important to us here is that we have a charity where people live and breathe this. So when I go back to that point around what's the 1 to 3 things that I need every person, regardless if you're joining me in the digital team or the fundraising team, what are the 3 things I need you to have to fit into this team? You have to live and breathe what sport and physical activity can do for young people. You don't have to be in it. You don't have to be an athlete or a footballer or a gymnast or anything like that, but you have to really understand it, because that comes through in any presentation, any conversation that you have. So regardless of if that's in the banking world or shipping or wherever you are, what's those values and things that you would want that person? I always liken it to, if you're in a bar or something and you look across and you've got a new member of staff and you see them talking to someone important, if you've done your recruiting right, you should be very comfortable and happy that you know that they're going to be having a good conversation over there. If you think, God, I've got to get straight over there because they're going to say the wrong thing, that's on you. You didn't either recruit right, or you certainly didn't onboard right. So that's my feeling, that it very much, the needle probably sways more towards values and cultures.
Yeah, yeah. And you as part of the apprentices that you bring on and the apprenticeships that you do, there's obviously a huge diversity of background, diversity of thought. In terms of the people that you've brought into Coach Core as an organization,
Yeah.
how important is it that they have specific experience in the fundraising? Obviously, they've got to have the skills, but what I mean by that is if you are looking for someone in the digital marketing team, they have the digital marketing skills, but do they need to come from another physical activity or another charity, or can they come from somewhere else and bring something different into that role?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I'm very, very fortunate, and I'm very conscious that I'm fortunate that sport and physical activity means a lot to so many different people.
Yeah,
So, for example, I mean, and to hopefully answer your question, my when we became an independent charity, my first two direct hires were my head of fundraising and my head of digital. Right, the head of digital has all those skills that you just mentioned, but he's also the GB ultimate frisbee coach as well, right? So again, lives and breathes it in his personal life as much as his professional life. So that's great. My head of fundraising, not so much, but she enjoys going out for a run, and she understood what it meant to her husband who was training for different events and things like that, and had a relatively okay experience with sport at school, but understood what it was to not have a positive experience as well. So I think that bit around, absolutely they need the skill sets, but they definitely need to kind of understand what your world is about. And that's probably really difficult for some other sectors, right? We don't bounce out of bed, with due respect to some sectors, and think that was what I always wanted to do, or that's the thing that motivates me and stuff, right? But I think there's ways of actually understanding. So if it's like a sales role, have they shown and demonstrated that actually they're just really good at speaking to people? They're just a very confident person who can have conversations. Again, sounds fluffy, but that over a CV that has somebody that's done a load of qualifications and actually can't talk for toffee, that's a very different thing. So yeah, I hope maybe that answers the question,
yeah,
but certainly for
yeah,
me, that's one of the big things. Again, it goes back to that point about disarming. They just assume that I'm going to sit there and start talking about their CV, and actually, our first thing I want to know is what was the best thing that you remember about sport and physical activity? That could be at school or the Olympics that you saw on TV or something. Just tell me your best experience. If I see them doing that and smiling, I've got a winner straight away. I know that that's someone that cares about it.
yeah.
So yeah, just little shifts like that.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating way of getting people to relax as well, because
Mm,
you go into an interview thinking it's a traditional interview. You know, you've studied everything, you've gone through the company. We should have done anyway. Gone through the company, you understand how you could potentially add value. But then if someone asks, right, well, that's going to completely disarm you, but ultimately also completely relax you, because you're then like you're talking about something that you love and you're passionate about. And actually, goes back to some presentation training I had years ago, and it was our chairman that was giving it, and he turned around to me and was like, "You can tell that you're passionate about this topic A, because of the way that you're presenting it. When you get onto topic B, which is obviously something that we've asked you to prepare but isn't as passionate, you can
mm,
it's night and day." And I think it's very obvious that when that does happen, the CV and the job description, they are bits of paper effectively,
mm-hmm,
and you can write a lot of stuff on them, but they might not come to life as much. And you kind
mm-hmm.
of mentioned around how you want to kind of rip them up anyway. How do you approach that kind of, less so the CV, but again, coming back to the people that you've brought into the Coach Core as an organization, from a job description perspective, how do you make sure that it is worded or labeled in the right way, and that everything that you are trying to get out of people that you want in is coming across?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I would say it actually starts with something that I'm potentially being unfair here, but I don't see or feel that a lot of organisations do, and that's reflect on the previous hire. So really understanding what did you do well, and actually are you brave enough to go and speak to that person about their recruitment experience? If you're fortunate that they're still there, go and speak to them about, how did we make you feel? Ultimately, did you feel that we got to all the things that you were expected to be asked, or what worked really well, etc., etc.? So take some of that learning, be humble enough to really kind of understand that previous applicant's journey. And actually, also, one of the big things that one of my colleagues in my team, Amy's done a fantastic job about our recruitment strategy. Again, slightly more moving towards our young people, I appreciate, but just around really reviewing some of the demographics and the volume of things that are coming in. So taking time to understand whether things are working. Are you really talking to the audiences that you are trying to, fish from the right pools? Instead of, and it goes back to my very first point, if your traditional MO is a LinkedIn post and one or two recruitment agencies, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to, blow it off. But at the same time, if you're then saying, well, we want to drive EDI, or we want this person that can speak to Gen Z or something like that, well, arguably, don't go and do the same thing though. Go and actually have a look at some other things and try some new strategies out. So definitely, I think before any role, you need to do a bit of a backward facing piece. And then when you're looking at that kind of next step into your question around, how do you check and challenge some of those things? Again, I think it's very much around, do the questions match the JD? Like the thing that you're asking as a brief, what is it that you need this person to do? I think we've covered that enough, but also critically, like if there are skills and things on the CV, don't be frightened to actually ask them to really bring that to life. So, classic example is, tell me one example of when you did X, Y, or Z, right? Again, perfectly legitimate, fine question. Well, not really, if what I really want to do is just be blunt and say, that bit on your CV where you talked about that, tell me how you did that. Like, really just get to the nub of, that's the thing that I need in this job and you're telling me you can do it. Tell me more about it, like directly. Don't waste the question, essentially, because I think once you get beyond 6, 7 questions anyway, it starts to become very transactional, very boring,
Yeah.
and not fun, as per the opening gambit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the bit that sometimes we fall into, that mistake of having a JD, having a CV, and having a series set of questions that sometimes actually sit very separately, when all you really need to do is ask those 3 important questions.
Yeah, I think there's a real link here to the learning and development side of things, because everyone talks about how if you're on a project and something goes wrong, something goes right, there is always should always be a review process at the end to make sure that you're taking the learnings and you're moving that forward. I completely agree with you. I don't think that happens in the recruitment process. Now, I will shout them out. I had a conversation with Threshold Sports and their chief client officer, Penny Betts, earlier, and they do exactly that. They will ask candidates they've brought in what their process was like, so that they can learn to make sure that their future processes can be improved. And I think that's something that doesn't ultimately happen enough, for one.
Yeah.
But part of that is also actually the learning and development as an interviewer. How many people get that training in how to interview someone from a young age, or not necessarily young age, but young stage in their career? My first interview that I ever gave, it was basically, right, here's a CV, go and talk to them as a first interview. And you're like,
Yeah.
tell me about your work here. And ultimately, I'm junior, they're junior. Basically, all you're talking about is university. And so,
Yeah.
it just doesn't really make any kind of difference. And a lot of what I try to do is learn on the job, but also learn from other people when I'm in interviews with them. But then you do still get a bit of groupthink potentially. In terms of the process that you've gone through, and similarly the people that you've worked with, how much do you do any kind of formal training in terms of the interview process? Is that something that you've looked at, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, do you know what? It's such an important thing, and I'm glad you've raised it, because it was definitely something I wanted to speak about today. You're entirely right. I think, again, falling into that trap ourselves of even being this forward thinking, open, inclusive charity, like, how dare we feel like we can speak for or assume certain things on certain audiences that we're trying to work with and attract. And I'll give you what I hope is a really good example of this. I had the pleasure of speaking at quite a large HR conference a little while ago about how to recruit and retain Gen Z. Obviously, we're working in a really different climate now, arguably the fastest ever moving generation or climate ever, in terms of attitudes and approaches that we have to take. And, even if you disregard everything we've just spoken about for the past 20 minutes, I would be saying to you, your business is going to suffer in the future if you don't start to really think about this sort of stuff, because you now have to take a position where it's on you to also sell your organization to that candidate coming to sit in front of you. It's not on them to sell themselves to you solely. And the example I give when I spoke at this conference, I was talking about all the different things and about how you need to take different approaches and all this. And I really won't mug her off, but this lady from a very well-known high street bank came up to me afterwards and she said, look, I thought it was brilliant. It really resonated with me. And look, I really did try. And again, I don't want to make stereotypical judgments, but let's just say she had an accent very different to mine. But she was like, I really did try. And I gave this young person a chance. And do you know what? They turned up for the interview with trainers on. I was like, oh, right, okay. I said, can I ask you one question? She said, yeah. I said, were the trainers black? And she said, well, yeah, like perplexed. And I said, I pretty much guarantee you they're probably the best shoes they own. Like if that's a young person, that's them making an effort. And that's on you that you haven't really thought that through, or exactly to your point, Dan, upskilled yourself to recognize that. So again, it's not her fault, but what is her fault is the ignorance element that you haven't trained up yourself to look at that. So I think 100%, we are constantly evolving. We are not the fountains of knowledge on these things by any stretch of imagination. We're learning how to, change and train and how to speak and work with it. And we're very, very fortunate that, to your intro, actually now this spring, we're coming up to our 1,000th apprentice, which is an incredible thing. But actually with every apprentice that we're bringing through the system, we speak to them, we involve them in our recruitment strategies, we involve them in our wider strategies. Because if we're trying to change the lives of young people and appeal and communicate with young people, then guess what? You've got to go talk to them. You've got to go speak to them. So again, that let's helicopter out. If you're looking for the best banker in the world, or you're looking for the best makeup artist in the world, go and speak to the best of the class and see how they want to be treated, particularly if it's a younger demographic or a very different background to yourself. That's on you to make sure that you're selling yourself to those people as much as they're going to answer the questions that you've got lined up for them.
Yeah, I think equally it's they are making a decision to join you as much as
Right.
you're making a decision for them to come in. And if you're looking at, come back to the point around skills versus values and those types of things, the skill side of things is the relatively easy bit. Let's forget about that. But if you found someone that aligns with the values and the culture that you've got, you still have to sell that person that they will be good at this role and they will be good at your job and they'll enjoy their day-to-day life, because ultimately it's going to be a lot of their time in that role. And I think a lot of organizations believe or still have the belief that they are the sole person or sole thing with power, and therefore you want this job, and therefore it doesn't matter what the recruitment process is like. It doesn't matter how long I take to respond to you. It doesn't matter if I don't respond to you,
Yeah.
because we'll get one person and they'll do a job for us. And actually, the cost of getting the wrong hire is huge for a
Mm-hmm.
multitude of different reasons. And similarly, you might then have a role that is perfect for someone that was in that original recruitment process, but because the process was so bad, they're not going to go anywhere near you, and they're going to tell
Mm.
their friends or their network that actually it was a really bad process. I think the company is not going to be great to work with, and there's so many knock-on effects to that happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of my favorite things that I think we've started to do, again, we have this lovely middle ground where we're here to support the young candidates that are coming and presenting themselves to their employers, and we're here to support the employers as well. And I think this is something maybe we can touch upon in a moment. I think that's also where traditional recruitment companies let themselves down a little bit, that they don't work on both sides of the table. And one of the things we make sure that the young person asks all the time is, who will be there to mentor and support me? So almost, I'm assuming I'm getting this job. Who's going to be the person that supports me on this journey, right? So even the bravest of brave candidates might ask, what does my future development career pathway look like? Is there room to grow in this company, to beg your pardon? Those sorts of things. But actually, on a day-to-day level, who are the person that you are going to put me with that are going to make sure I get to learn everything about this organization or company and are going to shape my journey, right? That's such a fundamental question that I now would want to know if I ever move on from Coach Core. Like, what's the person that's going to help me? Ultimately, it's such a basic thing. But again, I don't think it's asked enough. And if you are the organization on the other side of that table, like 100% before you even press send on that job, that's the biggest thing you need to consider, is not just the job itself, but who is the person that's going to make sure that these next 90 days for this person incoming are going to be the people that are really going to help them. Like otherwise, exactly to your point, it becomes an expensive thing. I could sell the company, I could sell the job. I come in, I've got this crap person next to me that is making then life boring or my life difficult or whatever. I'm off. Like I'm not staying. And then we're back to the start and we've got to pay it all over again as an organization. So yeah, that critical link of the mentor, let's say, is I think goes missing sometimes.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm conscious of time, Gary, but I do want to just pop back very quickly into
Mm.
the recruitment consultant piece that you just talked about. I'd be interested to hear what, just kind of elaborate on that one a little bit as well.
Yeah, I found sometimes that it becomes extremely transactional, that essentially that it's I approach a recruitment company puts about 4 or 5 candidates in front of me. It's left to me to go and do all those interviews. We then come back and then that's it, job done, right? Whereas actually, to all the things we've spoken about, already today, I don't recall a single recruiter saying to me, right, you guys have clearly advertised for, let's say, people of color are very welcome to apply for this role. We encourage applications from more female, whatever it is, right? Are you actually set up for this? Like, have you got an interviewing panel that reflects that? Have you got an onboarding process that is going to ensure that that person gets support? You talk about yourselves as a charity that really cares about the mental health of its people. How are you going to make sure that that person has that level of support, or are you going to, those sorts of things? I don't think I've ever been challenged by a recruiter on any of those sorts of subjects, right? Ensuring that they're pushing and testing and challenging me as a good employer. And I think that would make such a difference to how people interview and how people recruit, but also obviously for those candidates on the other side to feel reassured that they are walking into an organization that is walking the walk as much as talking the talk on certain things. Because again, go back to certain demographics and certain, religion or race or whatever it is that we're proactively saying we want to do and want to work with and want to bring into our boardrooms or into our teams and stuff. But the lack of training is diabolical and one for another podcast. But actually, as I say, right back to that origin point, right back to the start, how are you differing? Your approach, your comms, where you place those adverts, who's doing that recruiting. I can't recall a time that I've ever had a recruiter that's challenged me on any of that. And in the same way, some of the candidates, that little bit of coaching beforehand. Again, there's some brilliant recruiters out there, so I'm definitely not one to bang, to beat people over the head. I'm just talking about my own personal experience. And I have seen some good coaching go on, of either things that I've had where I've gone for trustee roles or stuff like that, where they've actually rung up and they've gone through certain things with me. So that's brilliant. But like I say, from an employer side of things, that bit I don't feel is. I think there's a bit of a disconnect there.
I think it's a partnership approach that needs to be taken rather than a transactional approach.
For sure.
I completely agree. But Gary, we have probably gone over time a little bit there, but it's been fascinating. I think, as you said, we could probably go through another couple of these podcasts just talking on the different elements that we've been through, which is great. But before we end, we ask the same 3 questions to every guest that comes on. So we'll start with the first one. What's your most frustrating thing about recruitment?
Um, I think it's more around, if I can't obviously talk about that kind of rigid format, which I think I've hammered home my point on that today. So I'll leave that one be. It's probably why more organizations don't co-share, and perhaps goes back to that point also around some of those recruitment agencies being so much more proactive in supporting some of the education around that. So lots of roles that, particularly in current climate, it's really difficult to get a full-time salary for a fundraiser or for a digital person or whatever, and or cost of living going up, other people understanding work-life balance. They don't want more than 3 days a week. So actually getting organizations to pair and work together to create more full-time roles or whatever it might be. I just think co-sharing is still a bit of a dark art for many people, that they're either nervous of doing it or they're not getting the right advice.
Yeah, interesting. And you don't have to name them, but more than welcome to if you do. Who's been your best hire and why?
Uh, I mean, I'll go with the cliche of all my team at the moment, just in case they hear this and they, I'll also unwittingly pat myself on the back. No, I would say I won't name him because they are still very much in my network. But there was a young coach that came to me. This is pre-coach course, so don't worry, this isn't another coach course story. This is when I was working at a football academy, who I genuinely had 3 different people tell me don't give him the job. He came from a very, very tough background and lots of questions about his character. So wasn't even one of those people that you would say was turning over a new leaf. But the fact that he was walking through, I'd known him from coaching sessions and stuff, knew that there was something good about him. Day one shows, I've done all the prep, like worked him through it, got his confidence up. I took a risk, told him I'd taken a risk, gave him the job, and he didn't show up. And then pretty much for the rest of that week, he was late. So it was constantly putting an arm around him, batting away all the other people that were telling me that they were right and I was wrong. And fast forward, you probably obviously know the end of the story. Actually, he's gone on to be the most incredible coach, very high up at a major national governing body. So not only was it sort of justification to me, certainly going into things like Coach Core, that these rough gems do take time to polish, but it's worth the polishing. I'd love to think that those people that were the naysayers also learned something from that. And that's why I think that's the best hire I've ever had, because they now see it and think, I need to adjust my attitudes as well. So it's not just that one-to-one bit, it's a wider thing.
Yeah, love that. And then finally, what is and I think you probably already know this, but what's the one thing you would change about the recruitment world?
That recruitment is a skill and that it's always evolving and it needs time. We've talked about this today, so again, soapboxes away, but people don't train themselves enough on it, and recruiters don't train people enough on how to do it, or certainly give that advice. So I would say ahead of every role, if you're purely pulling off the same JD template and setting up the same 2 rounds and 3 people on a panel, just ask yourself your question, is that definitely the right thing that we want for this role?
Yeah, great. Gary, that's been fascinating. It's been brilliant. Really appreciate the time. I know there's a huge amount that a lot of people can take from this chat. So thanks for coming on Talent Talks. It's been great.
Absolute pleasure to be on here. Thanks for inviting me.